We had to get some levity in the moment there. Let's dive deeper into what happened with our panelists tonight. Let's bring in former Bush and Trump White House senior official at HHS, Jack Kalavritinos, and RC Communications president and Democratic strategist Calvin Dark, both live in person with me tonight. We had the golf question, or the golf thing in there, because I know you're an avid golfer, but we can talk about that some other time.
Yeah.
Calvin, I want to start with you.
Why?
Oh, you know why. A lot of talk about what happened on that stage tonight.
Mm-hmm. So here's my take. Joe Biden had one clear job, and it wasn't about policy. It was to make the comparison between him and Donald Trump, because he always says, don't compare him to the Almighty, compare him to the alternative. I think how he demonstrated that was more important than what he did, and he did not do that by any stretch. And I also think it was unfortunate because at the same time, we saw former President Donald Trump, who I thought was more disciplined but more wild, and if you listen to what he said, problem was that Biden's behavior was so distracting at times you didn't get it. So I came away from it saying that Biden has done a great job in a first term, but he's not up to a second term, and Donald Trump is dangerous and not ready or a fit for a second term.
Donald Trump, the one we saw, Jack, tonight really seemed like the same Trump we saw in debates last time around.
Are you saying the same Trump?
Oh, I think he seemed, in terms of just, I think people knew what to expect with Donald Trump. That's the thing with him. You know, he came in, and Calvin was right. He seemed very disciplined and on message, even though some things he said, as both candidates did, might be dubious in terms of facts.
All right. I mean, style, yes, but yeah. I would say that he was much more disciplined than the first.
You're right.
Because he was seen as beating up on old man Joe and sort of like Uncle Joe, that was the problem. But I think he agreed to all of these crazy debate rules. I've never really seen, and no one's ever seen anything like this, because usually you have the debate commission setting the rules. And the Biden campaign made a huge mistake by having the mute button off. But this, Trump campaign is extremely disciplined, and it showed by how he was tonight. He hit all the points that he wanted to. He was under control, and it was a very bad night for Joe Biden. All you had to do was listen to the CNN commentators afterwards, and they were talking about panic in the Democratic Party right now.
The first thing, as soon as they cracked the mic, as soon as President Biden started speaking, we're adjusting. I'm sure people were like this at home, adjusting the sound. Was something wrong with it? Because what we heard, Calvin, was the word around the scuttlebutt, many sources reporting that the president had a cold. Okay, that's something that you would put out there early on. If that was, you would lower those expectations. This is a debate that Joe Biden wanted. Let's do it, pal. That video. And the video that we saw with Biden saying, let's do it, pal, or game on, was not the Biden we saw tonight.
Right, and I wouldn't advise the campaign to even mention the cold at all, because you're then saying a cold can take down the person who wants another term in office, when all he's doing is comparing himself with Donald Trump. I think that what we're really going to have to think about tonight is choices, and I think it says a lot about the two choices we have that people aren't thinking, well, maybe I'll give Trump another look. We can see through Twitter, they're researching exactly what the bylaws of the DNC are. And I think that says a lot about the two candidates we have.
Yeah. In terms of topics out there, I think a lot of things that people wanted to hear were hit. Economy, that's always a big thing. Foreign policy, immigration was a big one, and the former president brought the numbers.
I think this was the single most clever thing that President Trump did, was that he often would pivot to immigration, whether it was talking about Social Security, Medicare, whatever the topic was. He was going after the #1 vulnerability, I think, of this president, and one of his biggest successes, which is saying we have a porous border. There are lots of problems with it, whether it's fentanyl, whether it's human trafficking, whether it's possible terrorism in this country, and he pounded on it. Not to mention Afghanistan, to always frame the foreign policy debate, including what led, in his view, Putin to invade Ukraine, was this perceived weakness by the White House.
As we look through the rest of that debate, Calvin, I think there was a bit of a change in tone as you got halfway through there. The president was trying to get some points in there, not really well delivered at that. But was there anything you think that he did right tonight?
I think that once he got going, there were some key issues, particularly around women's reproductive rights, particularly around immigration. I thought immigration would be the big thing that hit him hard. But he had really good answers about what he tried to do. But I think that one of the things former President Trump did that was dangerous yet effective is he connected the problem to people. Now, I think the solutions he proposed were kind of off the wall, but he really, instead of having like stats, he said, crime happens and it affects this person. If we don't have enough jobs, it affects this community. I think one of the things that hurt both of them.
But why is that dangerous, though?
Well, it's dangerous because some of the solutions that he had were dangerous, and then a lot of times he didn't have one. And I actually think the muting of the mics hurt both of them, because how cringy was it for both of them? You don't have anything else to say about Medicaid, black colleges, without the interruptions, it made them look like they didn't have enough policy.
I've never heard a debate where they go, you have 82 seconds left. Do you want to keep going? We are going to keep going. I want to take a break right now, and we'll talk a little bit more about this and what's beyond. So stick around. We are here live on the Final Five on this late hour, but we're here for you. Stick around. We're back after this.